Sutek's back in Doctor Who, but who is Sutek and what's his connection with the Doctor? Time to find out in another Tale of the Tardis. Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mount. Yes, it's Tales of the Tardis time. Sutek is back in Doctor Who. We saw him return in last week's episode, The Legend of Ruby Sunday. And he's back, obviously, in the, hopefully, exciting, thrilling, apocalyptic finale, Empire of Death, which airs on BBC One tomorrow. More on that in a moment. But who is Sutek? If you're new to Doctor Who, if you're not hugely familiar with classic Doctor Who, the reveal of Sutek in the last episode would have been a bit, BBC very sensibly have decided to fill that gap in people's knowledge, if they want it filled. Of course, Pyramids of Mars, the original serial where Sutek appeared, is available on the iPlayer, but they've chosen to highlight the episode in a new episode of the Tales of the Tardis. This is the little series which debuted last year around the time of the 60th anniversary, where old doctors, old companions, met up again in something called a memory TARDIS, a room in the TARDIS which is comprised of odd amalgams of previous TARDIS control rooms and bits of the TARDIS, and they came back to remember previous adventures. This is a useful tool that they can now use, I suppose, and quite a cheap tool because the set is there. All they have to do is get a couple of actors in with a few lines of new dialogue and then frame it around a repeat of an old classic Doctor Who story. Very sensible to do it with Pyramids of Mars because it is one of the classic Doctor Who serials. The conceit here then is that the Doctor, dressed in some sort of, and whether it's supposed to be a reference to Tom Baker's scarf, it's some sort of huge voluminous multicoloured jumper, is in the memory TARDIS with Ruby, talking about Sutek and his previous encounter. There's a very nice little reference to Sarah Jane Smith. And he talks about how he fought Sutek in the past and beat him, but he can't do this again. This then leads to a repeat of Pyramids of Mars across, I think it was a 75-minute, 80-minute slot. You may remember that last year the BBC did a new edit of the Daleks, the very first Dalek serial, in colour. But that was a 7-part serial, truncated down to about 80 minutes. And whilst it was interesting to watch, it became a little bit chaotic because editing 7 minutes down to 80 minutes is much harder than editing down 4 25-minute episodes to 80 minutes. You really have to lose very little material, apart from the credits, a couple of little trims here and there to scenes. Episode 4 was a bit truncated, but this was pretty much the story as we already know it. So the Daleks didn't particularly work as a narrative, particularly if you're familiar with the original story, because you know what's missing, and certainly the latter half of the story lost so much incident that it became very unbalanced. Pyramids of Mars works much better. This, like the Daleks, was edited by Doctor Who magazine's Benjamin Cook, and he's done a much better and much more reverential job of presenting Pyramids of Mars for a new audience. And I've seen the story again and again, and I have to say it's never been a massive favourite of mine for reasons that I'll expound upon shortly. But I think he's done very well here to give it a pace, quite a modern pace. It moves, it's always on the go, there's always something happening. It isn't slightly sluggish as some 60s and 70s TV can often be, because it was a different era. Didn't have that energy, that speed of modern TV. This version of Pyramids of Mars, which is very recognisable from the original, had a pace to it. And I think the production didn't look all that dated. I mean, obviously it's a mix of videotape for the interiors and films or OB material, whatever it was. I think it was a film for all the exterior stuff. And there's that slight jar of the fact that you've got studio sequences which are sharp and immediate and put you in the picture, and the slightly more distancing experience of a film. And that's one of the things I sort of miss from modern TV. Obviously it's all slicker now, it looks more cinematic, but there was something about the immediacy of video where the image was crisp and you felt that you were there with the characters because of the nature of videotape recording. But I don't think it jarred as much as I expected here, and I don't think it's it stuck out as much as I expected. Bearing in mind we don't get TV made this way anymore, apart from the soap operas. This had a modern sheen to it. It felt quite slick. And I think a modern Doctor Who audience would have no difficulty in buying into the story because it didn't feel dated. Possibly because it's a historical story anyway, because there were no contemporary 1970s references, apart from Sarah Jane mentioning she's from 1980, which is a minor part of the plot. But it felt quite modern, it felt slick, and it felt fast, and I could easily appreciate an audience that doesn't really watch 1970s television watching this and being quite engrossed by it. The story, as we all know, of course, is that Marcus Scarman is excavating a tomb in Egypt, discovers a strange creature hidden beneath and possesses him. 1911, the Tardis materialises in the old priory upon which Unit HQ was built, where they discover that something mysterious and evil is afoot. Sarah Jane is soon stalked by mummy creatures in the woods, and the Doctor discovers that Marcus Scarman has been possessed by Sutek, an ancient Osirian god, who's been imprisoned in a pyramid of Mars for thousands of years and is trying to find a way out so he can dominate the universe. It is a great story, and as I said, it has never been one of my favourites, and the reason for that is historic, I think, because this was aired in 1975 in Tom Baker's second season. I think I was still adjusting to the change in tone of the series. I was used to those gung-ho John Pertwee stories, which inevitably had lots of gun battles between unit and monsters rampaging through the streets, and I think I was still missing that in Doctor Who, because across 5 years I'd become accustomed to that sort of story, and I love those sorts of stories, those action stories. This is a bit more cerebral, it's a bit more thoughtful and thought-provoking, I think. There's a bit more to it, but as a teenager I wanted the gung-ho of units fighting monsters, and I still hadn't quite accepted that that was gone, because although units was phased out of Doctor Who at this point, as a viewer back then you didn't necessarily know that. You were sort of waiting for the Brigadier and Benton and co to turn up, and you're expecting the Doctor to go back to being a scientific advisor. But of course, behind the scenes, Philip Hinchcliffe and Robert Holmes, the producer and script editor, were moving Doctor Who away from that. They wanted to put him back out into space. They wanted to make the show a little bit darker. And of course, this particular season, as we know, the stories were all based on or variations on classic horror science fiction stories, apart from Terror of the Zygons, which was a hangover from the previous season. So we had your Doctor Who doing the Mummy, as it would do Frankenstein in The Brain of Morbius, as it would do Invasion of the Body Snatchers in The Android Invasion, as it would do Forbidden Planet in Planet of Evil, and of course Thing from Another World in The Brilliant Seeds of Doom at the end of the season. So this is Doctor Who riffing off the classics to create a real sense of the gothic. And it is quite gothic. You've got all that cathedral sort of music in the first couple of episodes, and the whole Egyptology thing with mummies and all the paraphernalia on the set. It creates that feeling of this big, creepy, Hammer-esque type story. You can imagine this as a Hammer mummy sort of film, with Christopher Lee talking about the place in bandages. But here with the Doctor Who twist, of course, they're servitor robots. So over the years, I've come to appreciate the story a lot more. And I think watching it again last night in this omnibus edition, with not much cut from it really, a few little lines here and there, and I think the fourth episode, as I said, was a lot of the padding from that was taken out of the mazes around the pyramid. It got to the point a lot more. I appreciated it a lot more, and I must admit, watching it, I sort of yearned for those days when Doctor Who, the pace wasn't quite as frantic as it is now, and you had time to develop supporting characters, and you had time for moments of quiet and reflection, where it wasn't about moving on to the next big set piece or the next thing. Much as I still like modern Doctor Who, I think it's great. Generally, you sort of watch this and you think, yeah, this had a certain class to it. And I'm not saying the modern series isn't classy, but it's had a classic serial feel, I suppose, in the old BBC style. And it was nice to have those reflective, more contemplative moments. I'm thinking of scenes where which is one of the great chilling scenes in Doctor Who, actually, as far as the Doctor's concerned, where Lawrence Scarman has just been killed by his brother. We don't see him being killed, but we sort of know that's going to happen. And the Doctor and Sarah have been out on a little frolic of their own. They come back to the cottage and find him slouched in the chair. They don't know he's dead until he sort of falls to the floor. And the Doctor says a few words and then pushes his body aside as if it doesn't mean anything. And Sarah says to him, sometimes I think you're not even human. And he says human. And that sort of really emphasises very starkly that the Doctor is alien. The Doctor's reference points, the Doctor's morality is entirely different to ours. He can be quite dismissive of people who've died, particularly like people in this story like Lawrence Garman who didn't do what he told them to. They didn't heed the Doctor's advice. They did stupid things that led to their own death. And the Doctor, I think, certainly in the Tom Baker incarnation, was very dismissive of people if they did stupid things. And I think this is a really stark sequence, which I always think of as a perfect example of, the Doctor is an alien. You can't necessarily trust him. You don't know what he's going to do next. And I think sometimes we've lost that a little bit in the new series, as well as that sense of an unfolding drama over 90 minutes, as this was. Because, of course, now it's all packed into a pell-mell 45 minutes of constant shouting and running, which is great, but can be a bit exhausting. So it was nice to watch this and just relax into it and let it weave its spell with lots of interesting supporting characters and lots of background detail. And of course, it's always great to be reminded of those great old British character actors no longer with us, like Peter Copley as Dr. Warlock, Bernard Archer as the doomed Marcus Scarman, and the late great Michael Sheard, Mr. Bronson himself from Grange Hill, who made many appearances as Doctor Who over the years, as the equally doomed Lawrence Scarman. Very well presented then, I have to say. The framing scene at the end, of course, features the Doctor and Ruby back in the TARDIS, just wondering how they're going to beat Sutek, which then leads to the credit sequence. So yeah, I think it was very well done. In terms of the edits and changes that were made, there are a couple of odd little things. There's the first scene that you might recall with the Doctor in the TARDIS, where Sarah Jane comes swanning into the control room in a sort of Victorian dress, and there's a reference to Victoria, the Doctor's old companion. That's been sliced out of it for some reason. I don't entirely know why, because this is an episode that's been edited as a continuity reference point for older viewers, for new viewers, so I don't quite know where they cut out a reference to the past. There's also some new special effects sequences. Now, there's a scene at the beginning where you see the TARDIS spinning in space, which is actually quite good for the time. They've replaced that with a not particularly outstanding CGI effect of the TARDIS moving through space. But then shortly afterwards, when the TARDIS is attacked by Sutek, you see it sort of wobbling around in space. I would have thought that was a better scene to animate than the perfectly decent scene of the TARDIS spinning in space. But they've left that one in. Very odd. Otherwise, I didn't notice a lot else. I think the music was beefed up a little bit. I think Mark Ayres apparently sort of tweaked Douglas Simpson's original score. I think there are a couple of new bits in there. Apparently, although I didn't see it, there's a little bit from the Logopolis music, which is Tom Baker's final season, in the bit about the radio telescope, which is sort of a nod towards the Fourth Doctor's ultimate fate. And some of the effects were sort of perked up a little bit. The time corridor in the sarcophagus is more convincing, because I think that they've taken bits of the title sequence with the clouds and space and time and everything, and they took some of the CSO fringing off, which makes it look more of a piece rather than, oh, that's a jarring bit of green screen. So all in all, I think they buffed it up quite well. I think they edited it quite well. I think it worked quite well. So I think for new fans, I think they will have enjoyed it, because it just got on with it and told a rattlingly good story. Lots of atmosphere, the scenes of the mummies stalking through the forest. I remember Mary Whitehouse got her knickers in a twist about them at the time. And they look very good. The scene where the poacher gets crushed, still slightly comical, but also quite creepy. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. Sutek, voiced by Gabriel Wolfe, is one of the great Doctor Who baddies, so it's hardly surprising they brought him back, albeit 50 years later. And I think this generally was a very good way of introducing the story to a new audience, and a very nice way for older fans to appreciate it anew, with a little spit and polish to tidy it up a little bit. Excellent. So, rating this as an experience, I think, as an edit, as an experience, as a way to introduce a new audience to old Doctor Who, because they might be quite resistant watching creaky old TV, I'm going to give Tales from the TARDIS, Pyramids of Mars, 9 out of 10. Big fat 9 out of 10. That's Tales from the TARDIS, which is available on BBC iPlayer now, if you didn't see it on BBC 4 last night. A nice prelude to Empire of Death, coming tomorrow. Speaking of which, I'm off out this evening to see Empire of Death and The Legend of Ruby Sunday at a cinema screening tonight at 11 o'clock, so I'll do a little preview when I'm on my way, just before my review. I will be reviewing the film tomorrow afternoon. I'll be recording the review and editing it, and I'll be trying to get it online as soon as possible after the episode airs, depending on the availability of photographs. So that's where we are in terms of the immediate Doctor Who future. Next week, there'll be a few Doctor Who videos. I'm going to be doing a video, basically a review of the whole season, just looking back on the season and its strengths and weaknesses. Then I'll be doing a ranking the episodes video, because I know people like ranking. And I will also do a video about the future of Doctor Who. Doctor Who's in an odd place at the moment, in that it's between two stools. It's sort of popular, but not as popular as I think everybody thought it was going to be in this new era. So I'll just be doing a broad overview about where the show might be going in the next 2 or 3 years. Right, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to watch Tales of the Tardis, the Pyramids of Mars, which is on the iPlayer now. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.